Can we actually write a mathematical equation for human intention? For centuries, we've kind of treated the mind like this magical, untouchable cloud, and the body like a strictly mechanical, measurable machine. But what if we could mathematically link your subjective feelings directly to your physical biology, and do it without relying on a bunch of unproven philosophical leaps? Well, that is exactly what we're going to explore today.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating journey into a bold idea proposed by independent researcher Satya Prakash Dubey. His paper outlines something called the dual perspective computational framework. We're going to look closely at how dual perspective models actually work, breaking down some of the dense math and conceptual theory to see how human consciousness and physical biology might just be, literally, two sides of the exact same coin.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. Number 1, the mind-body gap. Number 2, the dual perspective approach. Number 3, the math of intent. Number 4, from thought to physiology. And 5, testing the framework. Section 1, the mind-body gap. To really understand why a framework like this is necessary, we first have to look at the historical friction between psychology and biology. Think about how science traditionally works, right? It's incredibly good at measuring third-person objective markers. Think of a doctor checking your blood pressure, but it historically struggles to formally integrate those hard numbers with your subjective first-person feelings, like the actual experience of why you're feeling stressed without making some pretty wild assumptions. The author captures this exact problem perfectly in the paper's abstract, stating, theoretical models often struggle to formally integrate structured first-person phenomenological reports with third-person physiological tracking without committing to unwarranted metaphysical assumptions. So, in plain English, the goal here is to bridge this massive gap purely with math, totally bypassing the endless philosophical debates about what consciousness actually is, and instead figuring out how it computationally interacts with the body.
Section 2, the dual perspective approach.
So how do dual perspective models actually work? Well, the core definition is that it's a methodological model. It treats the mind and the body not as two totally disconnected realms interacting via some unknown magic, but as two different descriptions of the exact same underlying biological system. Think of it like watching a live sporting event through two different camera angles. One camera shows the subjective mind, and the other shows the objective body. The organism is just a single system, but we're capturing it through two distinct lenses to get the whole picture.
The origin of this specific framework traces back to Varanasi, India, in 2011. The paper notes that it was derived after the author, Satya Prakash Dubey, experienced a direct recognition of eternal intelligence. Now, what's really fascinating for our purposes today is how that deeply personal origin point was subsequently developed and translated into a highly formal, mathematically rigorous, and fully testable scientific model.
To make all of this scientifically robust, the framework does a few absolutely critical things. First, it bypasses those sticky metaphysical debates entirely by focusing strictly on mathematical mapping. But perhaps most importantly, it organizes its claims into a strict theoretical hierarchy. It's kind of like building a ship with watertight compartments. If one specific equation at the very bottom leaks, it doesn't sink the entire conceptual framework above it. That structure makes the whole system highly testable.
Section 3, the math of intent.
Okay, let's peek under the hood at the core mechanism, the actual engine of how this dual perspective model operates. Now, what's really interesting is this single linear feedback law. It might look a little intense at first glance, but it's based on a well-known concept called Pantryagon's maximum principle, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's looking for the most efficient path. Essentially, it's finding the optimal way for your body to minimize stress and control effort.
Let's break down exactly what these symbols mean so you can see how elegant this really is. UNRT is the endogenous control signal, the regulatory action taking place in your body. S latent represents your mindful intention, that first-person mind perspective. Psi latent is the physical state of your body, like your physiological load or stress level. And alpha and beta, those are simply control coefficients that dictate how strongly these two elements mix together. Honestly, think of it exactly like a home thermostat regulating the temperature in a room. This equation mathematically calculates precisely how your mental intent regulates your physiological stress to bring your body back to a comfortable, healthy baseline.
The number 2 is paramount here for sure. These two perspectives, the psychological intent and the physiological load, they do not exist in isolation. They blend together into one single, unified control action that drives the entire biological organism.
Section 4, from thought to physiology.
So how does that play out in real time? Let's move to the pipeline and see how this builds from a single subjective intention all the way down into observable biology. It starts with step 1, a subjective feeling or intention.
Step 2 maps that using Bayesian inference, which is essentially calculating probabilities to handle uncertainty. Step 3 applies that exact math equation we just discussed. Step 4 pushes that through real-time physical changes in the body, the dynamic flow of the biological system. And finally, Step 5 gives us our measurable physical readout. It is a complete, connected pipeline from a mere thought to physical reality.
And what exactly are those physical readouts? Well, we are talking about tangible things your doctor can actually measure. The framework explicitly outlines target biomarkers it expects to see shifting at the very end of this pipeline. That includes things like high-frequency heart rate variability, inflammatory biomarkers like serum IL-6, and endocrine stress markers like cortisol. The model literally predicts that structured internal mental states will cause measurable shifts in recovery trajectories in these very specific third-person metrics.
Section 5. Testing the framework.
The author is very clear that scientific models absolutely must be grounded in reality. So how do scientists actually validate this whole thing? Well, to test it, you need a protocol. The paper proposes the Neuron Regulation Technique, or NRT. This is a specific breath-based intervention developed by the author, and it's introduced neutrally in the framework as one candidate implementation. By using NRT in experimental settings, researchers basically have a standardized way to trigger that mindful intention we talked about, and then see if the math correctly predicts the resulting changes in those biomarkers.
So the crucial point here is that this framework defines very clear boundaries for itself. The domain of application limits these claims to healthy adults, stress regulation, autonomic recovery, and functional or post-viral recovery. The paper explicitly states, and this is important, that this is absolutely not a replacement for advanced disease medical treatments. It's fundamentally about autonomic recovery and how the mind regulates the body's stress responses. Frankly, defining these limits is exactly what makes the theory scientifically responsible.
Furthermore, the framework is designed with a strict falsification hierarchy. It actively invites researchers to try and break it. You could test the mathematical limits by seeing if specific parameters fail against empirical data. You could test the computational limits by comparing it against standard neural networks. And fundamentally, you can test the conceptual limits. If adding those first-person states doesn't give you better predictive value than just looking at the biology alone, then the model gets tossed out. And that kind of rigorous challenge, that is the hallmark of really great science.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate potential of the dual perspective approach. We've seen how it structures the math, bypassing all that philosophical debate to link the mind and body in a highly testable pipeline, which leaves us with this final, amazing thought. If our subjective intentions can truly be mapped mathematically and directly to our biology, how might we, using focused frameworks like this one, ultimately rewrite our own physical code? It is an absolutely fascinating space to watch. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how your own mind and body connect.